What's going on, family? It's your brother. I know I done changed my name a lot, but I'm sticking with the prodigal son 901. And before I begin on this video, I just wanted to say that I thought a lot about making a name on my YouTube channel that not only related to me, but that meant something to me and that resonated with me. So I decided on the prodigal son because I like the story of the prodigal son and it resonates with me. So I still go by Abir Yisrael, but my name on my YouTube channel is now the prodigal son 901. So it's your brother Abir Yisrael, aka the prodigal son 901, and I'm back with another video. And this video is going to be titled My Dream Vision Part 3 because I believe this is the third time I'm making a video about my dream vision. And each time I make a video about my dream vision, I feel more compelled to actually go in depth into my dream vision, which I had this dream vision a long time ago, probably back in like 2015, and it still burns hot in my memory. Like I can still remember every last detail of the dream vision. And like I said, each time I make a video about it, I feel compelled to tell you more and more about the actual details or the actual events in the dream vision. And it just so happens to be 555 right now. So I'll take that as a sign as I should be making this video. As of right now, my Wi-Fi is out, so there's no telling how long it'll take this video to upload or when this video will upload, but hopefully it finds you in due time at the right time. So there's actually a few videos I want to make. The next video that I make is going to be about the events of the end time, more so dealing with the coming of the Son of Man and the what am I looking for? The what most people believe to be the chariots of the Most High. And I'm going to go into detail about that. And basically, I'm going to go into scripture and show you how one of the signs, or one of the major signs of the coming of the Son of Man, is a meteor shower. And that meteor shower actually hits the earth. It deals with the fire and brimstones and the hailstones, and I'm going to show you how that ties into the army or the arm of the Most High, which are the angels that have different colors, like the color of beryl, the color of sapphire, and things of that nature. So I'm going to show you how those meteorites, that fire, that brimstone, those hailstones, those meteorites are actually angels. I'm going to tie it together, and I'm going to show you without a shadow of a doubt how you can know that that's for sure, that's for a fact what that is, that those are angels. Because okay, I'm getting off topic. I'm sorry. Like I said, it's going to come in another video. This video is about my dream vision. So with that being said, let's get into the video. All right, so If you go back and watch my dream vision, the original video, and my dream vision part 2, or if you've already seen those 2 videos, then you know that in my dream vision, I had a vision of, from the creation of this universe, or this galaxy. I'm not gonna say this universe, but from the creation of this galaxy to where we are now in history, in society, in life, right? So I'm going to slowly get into my dream vision. I might go into scripture a little bit, but I'm basically going to detail every part of the dream vision from beginning to end. So when the dream vision first, okay, first of all, there's a few things that we all need to understand. We need to understand that we are spiritual beings. We are spiritual in nature. We are energy. We are frequency. We are vibration. We aren't these fleshly bodies. So when you look at it from that perspective, you have to understand, or it's easier to understand, I should say. When you look at it from that perspective, it's easier to understand my dream vision, because you're not looking at it from a physical or earthly perspective. You're looking at it from a spiritual or ethereal perspective. Excuse me, let me get hydrated before I start. All right. So, in the beginning of my dream vision, it's funny that I started that off like that, because the first book in the Bible is the book of Genesis, and in chapter 1 it literally says in the beginning. And that's how my dream vision started. There wasn't like some voice saying in the beginning or something, but my dream vision literally started in the beginning of the creation. So in the beginning, there were 2 life forms, but they were one. They weren't separate of each other. They were one entity, but they were only separate by their frequencies, right? Or their vibrations. One was a masculine being and one was a feminine being. And this entity, or these entities, were pure energy, but they were also pure darkness. And when I say darkness, don't think of darkness as evilness, because that's what darkness is usually equated with, evilness. Think of darkness as ethereal. Think of darkness as the unseen. Think of darkness as something that we don't completely understand, because we don't particularly live in darkness. What I mean by that is we're not physically blind. Most of us aren't physically blind, so we don't live in darkness. So there's no real way to understand how it is to live in darkness if you don't live in darkness, right? So my point being is that we shouldn't view darkness as evil. We should only view darkness as something that we don't understand. So these entities one masculine, one feminine, procreated, which caused the creation of this galaxy, which caused the Big Bang. So, when they procreated, this, okay, I'm sorry. I keep interrupting myself, but before I get into what I was just about to say, I have to say that these mythologies, they have bits and pieces of the original information or bits and pieces of the original story. I got the full story through my dream vision. So I'm able to piece it together. But these mythologies, the Sumerian mythology, the Greek mythology, the Egyptian mythology, the Roman mythology, Native American, whatever. These mythologies all have bits and pieces of the full story or the full image. So I'm going to tie most of it together using Greek and Roman mythology because that's the most recent. Those are the most recent fragments of the creation story outside of religion. Religion also has bits and pieces of the creation story. Religion is the new mythology. That's why religions are so prominent. There are some societies, there are some people in the world that still adhere to their original mythologies, but there are also societies and people that adhere to those ancient mythologies, but it's wrapped up in religion. And it's coded and it's wrapped up in these books like the Bible, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita, and so on and so forth. And they just give these deities new names. But if you could map out, you start with one deity and map out the history of that deity or that religion or that mythology, it will take you back to the original name of that deity. Just like Jesus, you can start with Jesus. We know Jesus isn't his real name because J wasn't even a letter when the Bible was written. The original Bible, not the King James Bible. So J wasn't a letter when the Bible was written. What was his original name? Some people say what's his name? Yeshua, Yahoshua, which Yahoshua is Joshua. But some people say Yeshua or Yahweh or whatever, right? But if you just look at the name Jesus, his name before Jesus was Jesus or Jesus, which Spanish-speaking people still use that today. You literally have people named Jesus in Hispanic or Latin American or Latin societies, right? That is spelled Jesus, but their name is Jesus because J is pronounced with a H. In older societies, the J wasn't a letter, but it could be replace with an I or replace with a Y, because that's what preceded the J. The I and the Y preceded the J. Even if you look at it, if you look at the I, it looks like a straight up and down J. If you look at the Y, it looks like a J with a V shape, right? It has a V at the top and then it has the line going down. It looks like a J, but it just has a extra line. So I and Y preceded the J. That's why you can swap them out. So it was Jesus. So if you break that down and you take out the YE, it's just Zeus. Zeus is the Greek god. He comes from Greek mythology. He's the Greek god of the gods of Olympus. He is the father, he is the king of the gods of Olympus, but he is also believed to be the father of most of the gods of Olympus as well. So basically, Jesus is Zeus. If you go back to Roman mythology, who was Zeus? Zeus, well, Greek came before Roman. So I have to give you an accurate timeline. Greek came before Roman. But if you go to Roman mythology, what did they change the name of Zeus to? They changed it to Jupiter. So literally, all of the names of these planets and their moons and these asteroids or comets, well, most asteroids and comets are named after people that discovered them. But some people, when they discover new asteroids or comets or whatever, they get to name it whatever they want. So they usually name it after like a Greek god, a Egyptian god, a Roman god, whatever. That's neither here nor there. But literally, all of the planets and their moons are named after Roman gods. You have Jupiter, you have Mars, you have Saturn, you have Pluto, you have Venus, you have Mercury. And that's not counting their moons. But all of them are named after, and Neptune. All of them are named after Roman gods. Like I said, Greek preceded Roman mythology. So Jesus or Jesus is Jesus. Jesus is just Zeus. Zeus, once he became Roman mythology, became Jupiter. So I said all of that to say that you can literally do this with a number of different gods and deities. You just have to go back far enough. So if you go back further than the Greek, you would have to go to like Egyptian mythology, Sumerian, Babylonian mythology, right? And I would get into that. Okay, most people believe, just to kind of like get into it a little bit, most people believe that the god Jupiter or the planet Jupiter is Marduk, the god Marduk in Sumerian and Babylonian mythology. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know, right? They're just speculating. It's just a theory for them. But some people say without a shadow of a doubt that Jupiter is Marduk from Babylonian and Sumerian mythology. Like I said, we don't know. And we can't just 100% completely and totally believe whatever they tell us. My point being is that you can go back as far as you can to the earliest mythology with most of these deities, which I've done because on my spiritual journey, I was coming into myself and I was realizing that we are connected to these deities in one way or another. And I'm going to get into that because it ties into my dream vision. I'm going to show you how we are connected to these deities. Some of us are connected to these deities, and some of us just worship these deities. Excuse me, I had to take a drink. All right, so to begin, I already told you that there were two entities, but they were one. And they are what we consider to be space, right? When you think about space, you think about the darkness of space or the expanse of space. You think about how they say space is infinite, but you also think about how in movies and TV shows, or even on these live streams nowadays, how when you look at space, it's just darkness outside of the stars that you can see, right? So this is what those entities were, or are actually. They are the complete and utter darkness of space. But they procreated. The masculine and the feminine procreated, and this is what caused the Big Bang. This is what created the galaxy that we live in. So once these entities procreated, the masculine and the feminine, the positive and the negative, they created a new being. Or should I say, they created a few new beings. Because once they procreated and the Big Bang happened, those two entities were able to separate. So now you have separate masculine and feminine, positive and negative energies. Masculine being positive, feminine being negative. And when I say negative, I don't mean it in a negative way. No pun intended. When I say negative, I just mean on an energy level. On an energy level, opposites attract. Also on a magnetic level, opposites attract, which magnetism is just energy. So when you have two magnets, if they're both positive, they repel each other. If they're both negative, they'll repel each other. But if you have one positive magnet and one negative magnet, they'll attract. So my point being is that these entities separated once they procreated and the Big Bang happened. The Big Bang is what caused them to separate. But they also created new beings. outside of themselves. So, these beings all lived together at one point. So you have to think of this from a higher perspective, from a higher level. These beings all lived together at one point. It got to a point where the sides, they lived together for eons. But they were naive beings. The new creation, they were naive beings. They felt motherless and fatherless because you have to think about it. Their parents were pure energy. These beings felt motherless and fatherless because they were connected to the source because they came from the source, but they were not a part of the source anymore. So they lived together for eons, and then eventually they started doing things on their own. They no longer considered the mother and the father. They no longer considered what would the mother think or what would the father think. They thought for themselves. So these beings had children, right? And once they had children, then a even bigger divide was created between the masculine and the feminine, the positive and the negative. Also, the light and the dark. The father was the light and the mother was the dark. So, once this third tier of beings was created, there was an even bigger divide. In Greek mythology, the first tier would be considered the Titans. The third tier would be considered the Olympians. So, the Olympians were the more rebellious of the deities or the beings. The Olympians were and I'm just using Greek mythology because it's easier to understand. The Olympians were the more rebellious because they were the youngest. Also, they were more aware of self because they were more removed from the source, being the third created. So once the Olympians came on the scene, that's when you get the rebellion talked about in the Bible. That's when you get Lucifer, which was Zeus, rebelling against the father. Well, his father. Zeus's father was Kronos. Kronos being Saturn in Roman mythology. Saturn being the father of time, but also the father of death. Because if you think about it and you actually look into it, time equals death. Because we have such a limited time on this place that we live, on this earth. The only thing that is constant is death. The only two things that are constant are death and time. You have to think about it like that. So Kronos, or Saturn is the god of time, but as well as the god of death. That's why in Greek mythology, they said that Kronos was eating his children. What it means by he was eating his children or devouring his children is how time, or the march of time, or us moving through time, we deteriorate until we eventually and inevitably die. That's what it meant by he devoured his children. But supposedly, Zeus killed Kronos or Saturn. And he made him, what's the word? Regurgitate his brothers and sister. Right? Which was Hades, which is Pluto in Roman mythology. Poseidon, which is Neptune in Roman mythology. And I believe Hera also got eaten. I don't remember. But this was only the beginning of the rebellion. So the Olympians, this is where, this is where the dream vision really starts to take off. The Olympians made their own creation. They had children, but they also made their own creation, which is the earth that we live on today, with the firmament around it. So, when the Olympians made this creation, that is what drove the divide. That is what caused the rebellion, because it was a rebellious act. There are universal laws. And one of the most major universal laws is that you aren't to create life outside of procreation. So they created this this planet, this earth, with a firmament, and it's like a science experiment, like a ant farm. You put a bunch of ants in a see-through container, glass container or whatever, and you just watch them work. So they created this biodome, which we call Earth. And they also created the animals that lived on the earth. The primates, the birds, the bees, the fish, etc., right? So from that, there was a divide, because they didn't procreate to create this life. So on the one hand, you had the Titans, which are the second group of beings that were created. Well, which were the first group of beings that were created. And they're still connected to the source because they came directly from the source. And they're angry at the Olympians because they violated a universal law. But there are also some Titans, like Prometheus, that sided with the Olympians, which is why Prometheus ended up being chained to a rock or imprisoned, basically. because he sided with the Olympians. Prometheus wasn't the only Titan that sided with the Olympians. Atlas was another Titan that sided with the Olympians. My point being is that you had Olympians and Titans on both sides. You had on one side a group of Olympians and Titans that wanted to adhere to universal laws. These are the more tamed or less rebellious, and they are on the side of the mother. They are on the feminine side. They are on the negative side, the side of the mother, the darkness. And then you had the more rebellious on the other side, which was the side of the father, the side of light, the side of positive energy, the masculine energy as well. And you had Olympians and Titans on that side. So this is what caused the war in heaven. Now, once the war in heaven began, before I finish that, there were also a group of beings that remained neutral. This is what they call the gray side. This is when people say everything is in black and white. It's like there's a gray area. There's also a group of beings that remain neutral. Neutral is gray. So once the war in heaven began, neither side really won. But it got to a point where the source, the father and the mother, decided to cast down they decided to cast down those on both sides, whether they were on the side of universal law or whether they were on the rebellious side. Because the father and mother were just looking at it like the war is unacceptable, or the war doesn't really help either side, right? So the father and mother decided to cast almost everyone down, more so the Olympians, into their own creation, which is the biodome, the biosphere, which isn't actually a sphere, but whatever. Yeah, cast down judgment. That's what I was looking for. They decided to cast judgment, and their judgment was that whether they were adhering to the law or whether they were rebellious against the law, both sides needed to be cast down into their own creation and live within their own creation to experience it for themselves. So basically, they had to experience why it is unacceptable to create life outside of procreation. And the only way for them to do that was to not be on the outside looking in or to be above looking down. They had to actually be living in it and experiencing it firsthand. So if you think about it from their perspective, Not the perspective of the father and the mother, but the perspective of those that were cast down. If you think about it from their perspective, time works differently for them. So in scripture, in the Bible, it talks about how, I forgot who said it. I said I might go into scripture a little bit, so I'm going to actually go into scripture. Homosexuality, what y'all on? It's Luke chapter 10, verse 18. Luke chapter 10, verse 18. And he said unto them, I beheld Satan as lightning fall from heaven. So, when you think about this verse, Satan falling as lightning from heaven. A lightning flash is quick, right? And if you look on YouTube at different videos of people talking about they saw the afterlife, they saw hell and stuff like that, or they saw judgment. They was like most of those people say that when they saw souls being judged, that if they were judged to be unrighteous, that they were cast down into hell. But it was like the snap of a finger. It was like lightning fall from heaven. It was like a flash of light. Like, that's how quick it was, them being cast down. So, like I'm saying, we're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, though. So, when you look at it on a spiritual perspective, these beings are higher in vibration than us. These beings are in a higher frequency than us. So they're in a higher dimensions. So time works differently for them. It moves slower the higher up you get in dimensions. We're on the third dimension, so it feels like, sometimes it feels like it moves slow, sometimes it feels like it moves fast. But if you go up in higher dimensions, time moves extremely slow. That's why in the scriptures it says that a day for us is like 1,000 years with the Lord. And 1,000 years with the Lord is like a day to us. So that's why I said time moves extremely slow the higher up in dimensions you go. My point being is that once these beings were judged and cast down into their own creation, it was like a lightning flash. It was like Satan being beheld as lightning falling from heaven. But to them, it was an extremely slow fall because time moves differently. It moves slower. So they fell through dimensions, and each dimension that they fell to they would be there for a couple of millennia at least, which a millennia is 1,000 years. So they would be there for at least a couple millennia, if not a couple of million years, because time still moves slower. But the further down in dimensions they got, the faster time started to move. So they would fall to a lower dimension, and they would live in that dimension for a period of time, possibly a set period of time. And they would create their own societies or whatever, right? But they were still divided. You had those on the side of the mother, which is the feminine, which is the negative, which is the dark. And you had those on the side of the father, which is light, which is positivity, which is masculine. And basically, they couldn't coexist because they were so removed from the source, being cast down. They couldn't coexist with each other. Also, they had different ideologies. One side was more rebellious than the other, so they couldn't coexist. But they all had to live in these dimensions together. And another point of them being cast down together was so that they could start to become harmonious. So they could start to reconcile their differences, come to see each other's points of view, even if they had different ideologies. You know how people say, let's agree to disagree. We could still live together and disagree on certain things, right? But they didn't see it that way. They were hard-headed, they were stiff-necked, so on and so forth. So, with that being said, making a YouTube video. So with that being said, they would live in these dimensions for at least a couple of millennia. And at some point in time, they would have another war because they couldn't reconcile their differences. And these wars would get so bad that it would cause them to fall into a lower dimension. So this took place for millions of years, or at least a couple of 100,000 years, until they got to the fifth and fourth dimensions. So once they got to the fourth dimension, they realized that their falling was inevitable. They realized that there was no way to stop them from falling into lower dimensions, if only they could reconcile their differences. But they never came to that realization. So once they got to the fourth dimension, they had to create a vessel for their spiritual energy. So life had already evolved to a certain point by this time, right? And this is where you get the cavemen. So primates had already evolved to cavemen or Neanderthals. But these beings weren't these beings bodies or vessels, I'm speaking of Neanderthals. They weren't strong enough to hold the spiritual energy of what we consider the fallen angels, or what we consider to be the Olympians, or what we consider to be the deities in Egyptian mythology or Roman mythology or Sumerian and Babylonian mythology. So they had to create vessels that were strong enough to hold their spiritual energy, because they couldn't live in a physical plane without being in physical bodies. So what they did was they took Neanderthals and they fashioned them. They genetically modified them to have sustainable bodies for these deities to inhabit. What they did was they took DNA from other creatures that lived on the earth, like serpents. Serpents, canines, birds or avians, and I'll say it like this: reptilians, which are serpents, avians, which are birds, canines, which are dogs. They already had primate DNA, and amphibians, like tadpoles. This is why the sperm, at least from what they show us, looks like a tadpole in water. So, this is the DNA that they used to genetically modify Neanderthals. And once they did that, they had created new beings. And these beings also had the DNA of the Olympians, or the deities, or the entities, the fallen angels, whatever you want to call them. They had to have DNA from these beings, because if they didn't, the vessel, it wouldn't have mattered how much genetic modifying they did. The vessels wouldn't be able to sustain that spiritual energy. So once they integrated their own DNA into these new beings that were created, they then had their vessels. This took a couple of thousand years. At least 6,000 years to perfect it. And within that time frame, the Neanderthals, as well as the new beings that were created, were procreating and reproducing. And they also needed them to reproduce, because there were at least a couple of 100,000s of them. I'm talking about fallen angels. There were at least a couple of 100,000s of them at the time. So they needed a good number of vessels, which is why they allowed them to reproduce. With that being said, it took them at least 6,000 years to perfect this. And throughout that whole time, the new creation, the new beings that were created, started creating societies, building societies, right? We don't know like exactly what the first society was, but we know that they started building societies. So the first beings that were created were the dark-skinned Asians, the black Asians. These beings were created first because they were technically in the region of what's now considered Asia. So at this point in time, all of the continents were still one landmass, but they were in the area which is now considered Asia. So the dark-skinned Asians were created first. Then from them, and I know I'm going to get backlash or whatever, or people are going to be hard to believe this or aren't going to be quick to believe this because everybody believes life started in Africa and the oldest bones or skeleton remains was found in Africa or whatever. That's a lie. You can't believe an archaeologist to save your life. And I'm telling you that for facts. They want you to believe that all life started in Africa because it causes a racial divide. But life really started in what's now considered Asia. So the dark skin or the black Asians were created first. And the reason we know that they were dark skinned or more melanated or black is because they had to have vessels that could that could absorb the energy of the sun or just absorb energy in general, but also not redirect, but what's the word? Not consume. It's right there on the tip of my tongue, y'all. It's right there. Basically, they needed beings that could not only absorb different energies, like energy from the sun or energy from the earth itself or cosmic energy, but also transform that energy into something else, into like physical energy, right? It's just like if you drink water or if you eat fruit or if you eat vegetables, you're doing that or you're consuming that to gain energy, and you're transforming that energy into physical energy, like consuming caffeine, basically. That's as simple as I could put it. If you wake up in the morning and you're tired and you feel like you're not going to make it through the day, you drink coffee or you drink caffeine to energize you because you are transforming that energy from the caffeine into physical energy. That's as simple as I can put it. But it's not, I'm not trying to use the word transform. I'm trying to use another word. I just can't think of it. So this is how we know that they are more melanated. They are black in skin or dark complected, brown, whatever. And this is why in the scriptures, they give you descriptions of people with skin like bronze or brass burned in fire. Because this is what absorbs the energy. This is what absorbs the energy from the sun, the cosmic energy, whatever. And it's all because of melanin. And I'm going to get into why melanin is so important. So, after the dark-skinned Asians were created, excuse me, don't worry about it, but excuse me. After the dark-skinned Asians were created, they started building societies, creating societies, right? Possibly the I don't know which predates the other, but possibly the society of Mu was created. I don't know if Mu came first or Atlantis came first. I can't remember. But yeah, so this society was created, and the Olympians, or the fallen angels, or whatever you want to call them, hadn't fell to the third dimension yet, but they knew their time was coming. So they were teaching their new creation. They were teaching their new creation how to do certain things, right? They were civilizing them. So these beings were also intelligent because they had DNA from the fallen angels or from these deities or these entities. So they were intelligent. That's why they were able to teach them. So they were able. Well, at first they weren't thinking for themselves because they were being guided. So after the dark-skinned Asians in the society of Mu, the Africans were created. Like the literal Africans that are in Africa right now. The Africans were created. And I'm trying to remember where Atlantis ties into this. It's before, I know Atlantis is before Egypt, but I can't remember where it ties in. Or it might have been after Egypt. I can't remember. I think Atlantis came after Egypt. Okay, so anyways, before I get off topic, the Africans were created next. And once the Africans were created, they had what they needed. And there's also other beings that were created from procreation with Neanderthals. So the dark-skinned Asians and the Africans procreated with Neanderthals, which had evolved by this point from Neanderthals to something else. But yeah, they procreated and created beings like the Arabs. So Arabs are a cross between dark-skinned Asians, Africans, and Neanderthals. But they weren't Neanderthals by this point. They were called something else. So that's where Arabs came from. On the other hand, You had the beings that were on the mother's side, that were on the negative side, that were on the feminine side, doing their own genetic modifying. And they ended up creating Caucasians. But they created Caucasians in the Caucasus Mountains, in the caves of the Caucasus Mountains. So this is where Caucasians come from. At this point, there are two brothers in the Olympian pantheon, or the Egyptian pantheon, or the Roman pantheon. There are two brothers. One is Satan, one is Lucifer. Lucifer is on the side of the father, Satan is on the side of the mother. And I've explained already in previous videos how Satan and Lucifer aren't the same person. So Satan is on the side of the mother, Lucifer is on the side of the father. You get it? Okay, got it. So Lucifer and that whole side of the father, they created the dark race of beings. They created the Africans and the dark-skinned Asians. Satan and the mother's side created Caucasians. Now, right before they all fell into the third dimension, Caucasians were let out of the Caucasus Mountains. But they weren't created like the dark-skinned Asians and the Africans. So they were more savage because they lived in the caves of the Caucasus Mountains. They were less civilized, I should say. Not more savage, but they were savage. They were less civilized. And they were being taught on a different level. They were being taught to be more subservient. They were being taught not to question what they were being commanded to do. So they never got a higher level of thinking. So once they were let out of the Caucasus Mountains, they started integrating into what is now considered Asia and Europe. This is how you get the European nations as well as the lighter skinned Asians. Excuse me. Now that we've got that understanding, where am I going now? Okay, now that we got that understanding, right before they fell, Egypt had became a thing. Egypt had become a society, right? And it was at that point in time the most advanced society, because you have to remember the Africans were taught by Lucifer and the father's side of deities or fallen angels everything that they knew, but they also were on a high level of learning and thinking. So, like I said, they were Egypt at that time was the most advanced society. And the pyramids were built because these deities helped build the pyramids as a spiritual nexus or as a spiritual antenna to absorb energy. Also, the obelisk and stuff, right? So the beings had a war. Satan and Lucifer had a war. The side of the mother and the side of the father had another war in the fourth dimension. And this war caused them to fall into the third dimension. Those on the side of the mother inhabited Caucasians and lighter race beings. I'm sorry that I didn't get into Native Americans and Latin Americans. Well, not Latin Americans, but Latin in general or whatever. But those beings came way later. So Satan in the side of the mother, they fell into Caucasians. Lucifer in the side of the father, they fell into the Africans. More importantly, or more so, the Egyptians, but also the dark-skinned Asians. Now, at this point, all of creation have their own way of thinking. They're able to think for themselves. They have their own way of doing things. They have their own societies. And they're living amongst these people, the fallen angels or the Olympians or the deities or whatever you want to call them. They're living among these people. And they start living at such a low vibrational rate or a low vibrational frequency that they start forgetting source. They start forgetting where they came from. So this is where writing comes into play. They started writing as a means to remember who they were and where they came from. This is on the side of the father, Lucifer. My bad. I'm not calling Lucifer the father. But this is on the side of the father. They started writing to remember who they were and where they came from. So, it started with hieroglyphs, which there were hieroglyphs before Egypt because they were teaching these beings how to write. But they started with pictures. They started with images. And each picture or image equated to a word or a sentence, right? That's how they taught them to write before they gave them letters. So eventually they started writing books. And like I said, they used these books to remember who they were and where they came from. I got to center myself. So, there came a point in time when basically there was another war. Satan used Caucasians to attack Africans and the dark-skinned Asians, or the side of the father. The side of the mother basically use Caucasians to attack the side of the father. That's as simple as I could put it, right? And these people were technologically advanced. So the first war that happened, there was a nuclear explosion. And what happened was all of the beings that were in fleshly bodies fell asleep. But before they fell asleep, they knew the outcome of what the war was going to be. So what they did was they wrote books, and they gave those books to their creations, people that they trusted, though. And they left it with them so that after the outcome of the war, they could retain that information of who they were and where they came from. So what I'm saying is the outcome of the war was nuclear winter. And what nuclear winter does is, if you think about winter, the cold makes you more docile. It puts you to sleep. Like if you think about hypothermia, you just basically drift off into sleep, and that's how you die. From your temperature being, from your body temperature being so low, below freezing, right? So the war caused nuclear winter. And beings on both sides fell asleep, basically. And when I had my dream vision, the way it was presented to me was like, there's a certain, it's like hibernation, but there's like a certain amphibian, because they do have amphibian DNA. There's a certain frog that hibernates in the winter, basically. And people think it's dead. They think it's frozen to death, right? But it's actually hibernating. Like it appears as if it's dead. Like you can't tell if it's breathing or anything like that, right? But actually it's just hibernating. So this is what happened with the war. Nuclear winter happened, and all of the beings fell asleep or went into hibernation, basically. Now, on both sides, like I said, they knew what the outcome of the war would be. So, on the side of the father, you had them writing books and giving it to the Africans or the Egyptians, and giving it to the Asians, so that when they would awake, they could obtain that information from the books and also retain the information of who they were and where they came from. Now, on the other side, on the mother's side, they had traps in place for when the side of the father would awaken. They had Caucasians on a conquest, and they were using religion to distort the original information. So they had Caucasians going on a conquest, enslaving some of these people and giving them religion. And when they gave them religion, they took the original information and they distorted the original information. They revised it, they infiltrated it, whatever. And they would give it back to them and make them learn it. And this was a trap and a means to keep them from remembering who they were and where they came from. And by them, I mean the side of the father. I also mean the dark-skinned, more melanated beings. So, the first war happened. Nuclear winter happened. Or nuclear winter was the outcome of the war. And all the beings fell asleep. A couple of 100 years later, or maybe even a 1,000+ years later, they wake up, right? And when they wake up, the side of the father is expecting the creation or the beings that they left their information with to give them their information so that they can study it and remember who they are and where they came from. Now, some of those people actually do it. But you have those on the other hand that don't do it because they were enticed or they were being controlled by the side of the mother and Satan and the Caucasians. And those that don't do it basically give them the religious books and give them religion instead. So you have some of the side of the father that actually have the original information, and then you have some of the side of the father that don't have the original information. They have the revised version, basically. So this is after the first war, and they're basically vibrating at a lower vibration or a lower frequency. They can't go any lower than the third dimension, though. They can't fall to the second dimension. So their thinking capacity is lowered. But you still have some that are connected to the beings in the higher dimensions. Like the neutral beings. The neutral beings didn't fall. Or at least not all of the neutral beings fell. So you have those that are still connected to the source in the third dimension that are basically pleading with those in the higher dimensions to help them. But it's falling on deaf ears, basically. But you do have some beings that tried to help the best way they could without actually interfering. So this is where the time of Israel comes in. They still have to reproduce these vessels for their spiritual energy to inhabit, because they haven't figured out a way to go back into higher dimensions. So they begin reproducing, and you get Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve is on the side of the Father, as we know, because the Bible only talks about the Father. So Adam and Eve came from the side of the Father. But the thing about it is, Satan also had a hand in it, and Satan also procreated with Eve. Satan, which is called the serpent in the book of Genesis, he also procreated with Eve. So you have Cain and Abel. So Cain is from Satan, and Abel is from Lucifer, basically. But both both Eve and Adam are from the line of the Father, basically. So Adam is a direct descendant of Lucifer, and I want to say that Eve is as well, but I don't think that Adam and Eve were brother and sister. I believe they might have been like distant cousins or something like that. But yeah, they're both from the line of the Father, and they're both from the line of Lucifer. So, like I said, Satan also procreates with Eve, like Adam did, and that's how you get Cain and Abel. Cain retains all of the DNA from Satan, and Abel retains all of the DNA from Adam. This is why they have enmity. This is why they have a division. I got pause. Let's look at the definition of enmity. Enmity, the state or feeling of being actively opposed or hostile to someone or something. Let's go to enmity in the Bible. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So, the person that was being talked to was the serpent, or Satan. And the Most High, or the Father, was telling Satan that he would put enmity between the woman, between him and the woman, and his seed and her seed. And he said, the seed of the woman shall bruise his head, and he should bruise the heel of the seed of the woman, basically. So, Cain and Abel. They have an enmity with each other, which an enmity is being actively opposed or hostile to someone or something. This is why Cain kills Abel. Now, by this point, these beings have fell so low that they don't remember who they are and where they came from. But Adam and Eve are still connected to a source in a way. Now, my point of bringing up that they were procreating after the first war happened is because of reincarnation. Like I said, they still needed beings that they could use as vessels to inhabit their bodies, or that could contain their spiritual energy. So Before the war, when they first inhabited these vessels, they could live for up to at least 1,000 years. At least 1,000 years. Before they even showed signs of aging. And that's because they had literally just recently fell. So they were still connected to the other dimension, the higher dimensions. They were still connected to the source in a way. They still had a higher vibration, a higher spiritual energy about them, or within them, I should say. So they were able to live for at least 1,000 years, maybe more. After the first war happened, the first Great War, I should say, after the first Great War happened, they could only live for up to a couple of 100 years. Let's say they could only live for up to about 500 years. So the thing about it is, when they died, if they hadn't raised their vibration enough to be able to go back up into the higher dimensions, like the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, etc., if they hadn't raised their vibrations enough, if they hadn't learned something from being in or living in the 3rd dimension, they would have to reincarnate. So this is why they reproduced and created more vessels for their spiritual energy to inhabit. They would have to reincarnate. Now, like I was saying, after the first Great War, these vessels could only live for at least up to 500 years. Some probably could live more. But let's say the the least they could live was 500. So, like I said, this is when the time of Adam and Eve comes into play. So, there was always an enmity between them from the very beginning. From the time the one entity, the positive and the negative, the masculine and the feminine entity, procreated and created what the Greeks called the Titans. After the Titans created what the Greeks called the Olympians, there was an enmity between them, because you had one side, the side of the father, that was rebellious, and you had the other side, the side of the mother, that was more that was less rebellious and leaned more towards the side of universal law. So there was always an enmity. And there was enmity between them up until the day they fell into the 3rd dimension. So even after they fell into the 3rd dimension, there was still an enmity between them. And all of this is from my dream vision, by the way. So even after they fell into the 3rd dimension, there was still enmity between them. Like I said, you had 2 brothers. You had Satan and you had Lucifer. You had Satan on the side of the mother, or from the line of the mother, and you had Lucifer from the line of the father, but they were brothers. My dream vision didn't exactly tell me like who their father and mother was, but I'm assuming they had to be from opposing sides. Their father and mother had to be from opposing sides, but they were brothers, right? But Satan had more of a feminine energy about him, a more negative energy. And Lucifer had a more positive energy and a more masculine energy about him. So this is also where the yin and the yang came from. But it's kind of important, but there's neither here nor there. So even after they fell into the third dimension, there was still an enmity between them. And I brought that up with them being brothers because, like I said, you had Satan doing his own thing in the Caucasus Mountains with creating Caucasians. And then you had Lucifer on the other side doing his own thing with already having created vessels, but giving them I wouldn't say giving them free will, because he's technically not their God, but basically showing them how to use their brains, showing them how to have a higher mental capability. So like I said earlier, Satan decides to move against Lucifer in the side of the father. Satan in the side of the mother, I should say, decides to move against Lucifer in the side of the father. And they use the Caucasians to do this. This is the Greeks, this is the Romans. And when you get to the Romans, you get the Crusades. They go on a conquest. So, anyways, I'm just showing you how there was always an enmity between them, even before we get to Cain and Abel. So there is a third child, Seth. And Seth is basically like the middle child. Well, he's said to be the youngest in Genesis. But what I mean by middle child is he's balanced. He has masculine and feminine energy, or he has positive and negative energy. He has energy from both the mother and the father. Whereas Cain only had energy from the mother because Satan was his father, and Abel only had energy from the father because Adam was his father. And Adam came from Lucifer. Well, was a descendant of Lucifer. So, Cain and Abel have an enmity, but Seth isn't really talked about because he's a more balanced being. So Cain kills Abel because of that enmity. So the line of the father is kind of cut off with Abel, but not exactly, because it lives on through Adam as well as Seth. Because like I said, Seth is balanced. The line of the mother, as well as Satan, lives on through Cain, which we know Cain goes on to procreate with the other beings that lived on the earth. Well, he took a wife, and they procreate, and so the line of Satan and the mother lives on. So by this point, the side of the father and the side of Lucifer realizes that they have to work on self. They have to work on knowledge of self to break the cycle of reincarnation. They have to work on knowledge of self in order to be able to to ascend. Satan decides he doesn't want to ascend anymore. He wants to become the ruler of this place. So the story in Revelation about the war in heaven between Satan, which is also Saturn in in Roman mythology. The story about Satan and the archangel Michael, which is Lucifer, by the way, fighting in heaven in Revelation chapter 12. This is a spiritual war. And it's really a callback or a flashback to before they fell to the third dimension. Because I told you they had a war in the fourth dimension right before they fell to the third dimension between Satan and Lucifer, the side of the mother, and the side of the father. They had a war in the fourth dimension, and then they fell to the third dimension. So this is like a callback to that. This is a flashback to that war that they had in the fourth dimension. And then it talks about the enmity that was placed between Satan and Eve and Cain and Abel. So I'm going to read it and you'll see how that's true. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Now, people would like to believe that this is the Christian church or this is Israel. This is Eve. And I'm going to show you how you know it's Eve, because you will see the enmity. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. And behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And so it's a flashback to the war in heaven, but it's also a revelation, a prophecy of future events after they fall to the third dimension. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven. So this is Satan in the side of the mother, and did cast them to the earth. So Satan was still in the fourth dimension when a third part of the side of the mother, or the line of the mother, fell to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. That's how you know Satan is Saturn. Saturn in Greek mythology is Kronos. Kronos devoured his children. So it's literally the same. It's coming back full circle. It's literally the same mythology or the same story of Kronos devouring his children. So this child that the dragon is waiting to devour is Cain, because Saturn or Kronos devours his own children. And she brought forth a man child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. So this is Abel. Abel was killed by Cain. So Cain wasn't devoured by or let's look at it from this standpoint. By devoured, just think that he wasn't actually devoured by Satan, but he was enveloped in Satan's DNA or Satan's spiritual energy. So look at devoured from that standpoint. So she brought forth a man child, which was Abel, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And this catching up is when Cain killed Abel. Abel was supposed to rule all nations with a rod of iron, but his time was cut short. He didn't even get to rule the nations because he was caught up to God once Cain killed him. And we know this because in the book of Genesis, after Cain kills Abel, God comes to Cain and asks him, "Where's your brother Abel?" And he says, I don't know, am I my brother's keeper? Right? So it says, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days." So this is after she had sex with Satan, and this is after she bit the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge and good and evil, and she realized what she did. She fled into the wilderness. And you kind of get a story of this in the books of Adam and Eve, which are in the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. So we could look at that. I'm not going to read the actual books, but see, the first book of Adam and Eve, the second book of Adam and Eve, the Slavonic life of Adam and Eve, right? So like I said, you kind of get a more in-depth account of what happened after they fled into the wilderness. All right, so Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 is the war in heaven, the war in the fourth dimension before they fell to the third dimension. And there was a war in heaven. Michael, which is Lucifer, and his angels fought against the dragon. So this is Lucifer and the side of the side of the Father, excuse me. This is Lucifer and the side of the Father fighting against Satan and the side of the mother. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. So this is when they all fell to the third dimension. And the great dragon, but they're only focusing on Satan. They're only focusing on the dragon. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So they're only focusing on the fall of Satan from the fourth dimension. And they're talking about how he used his angels, or he used the side of the mother and their creation, the Caucasians, to deceive the whole world. Verse 10, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. Now, Satan in Hebrew literally means accuser. So Satan was the accuser of Lucifer and the side of the mother, which he probably accused them of being the reason that they fell in the first place. Because, like I said, the side of the father was the rebellious side. So he was probably accusing them of being the reason that they fell in the first place. Now, when it says there was a loud voice in heaven saying, now is come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, which Christ means consciousness. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. God is a title, of course. But it's more than likely someone from the side of either someone from the side of the Father or one of the neutral beings that is saying this. And the kingdom of their God and the power of his Christ is the original teachings, the original universal laws, which, like I said, one of the major laws is you aren't supposed to create life outside of procreation, outside of reproduction, because it's unnatural. So this is what the kingdom of their God is like, and the power of his consciousness. And they say now is come salvation and strength, because with both sides being cast down to the third dimension, now they're able to witness why there are universal laws. Now they're able to experience it for themselves and witness and realize why there are universal laws in place and why you're not supposed to create life outside of procreation. So this will actually give them salvation, and this will give them a higher level of spiritual consciousness. And through that, they will be able to ascend again back into the higher dimensions. But it's only focusing on Satan, the accuser, because he's creating a bigger divide by accusing the other side of being the reason that they fell in the first place. Which, like I said earlier in the video, that neither side really tried to reconcile their differences, which is another reason that they continued to fall. If only they learned how to reconcile their differences. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they love not their lives unto the death. The blood of the lamb is literally talking about a sacrifice because lambs were used for sacrifice. So when it's talking about the blood of the lamb, it's not talking about Jesus Christ sacrificing himself so that we could overcome Satan. It's talking about literally one of those beings made a sacrifice for the good of everybody, for the rest of the beings that were falling into the third dimension. And the only way to do that was to cast themselves down. But basically, somebody realized this, that the only way for them to ascend was to descend. And that's also in scripture. So before I finish reading Revelation chapter 12, Ephesians chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. Now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth? He that descended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. So like I said, somebody came to this realization that they must first descend in order to ascend again to the higher dimensions. So that was their sacrifice. Revelation chapter 12, verse 12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman, because there is enmity between them, which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman. This is the great deluge in the book of Genesis with Noah, or the great flood, I should say, in the book of Genesis with Noah, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth, which is when the waters receded. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which was those that came from the line of Seth. Because, like I said, Adam was already killed. So that seed lived on through Seth and his descendants. So that's the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So they have their own commandments, which is quite ironic because, like I said, the side of the mother were the ones that actually wanted to adhere to the universal laws, but Satan ends up becoming the main antagonist to this because he artificially creates life. On the other side, the more rebellious of the deities or entities, the side of the Father realize why it's unnatural to create life outside of procreation. So this is why they have laws. And this is why they adhere to the laws. So the rebellious become less rebellious, and the less rebellious become more rebellious. But the side of the mother and Satan, they see it as a means to an end. What's the saying? A necessary evil, basically. They see it as a necessary evil. But the side of the Father realizes that there is no such thing as a necessary evil. Some things are just unnatural to the way of life, to the flow of life, to universal law. Like I tell people with the commandments, there are certain things in life that if you're on a certain level of consciousness, that shouldn't have to be explained, that are just understood. Like thou shalt not kill. It's understood that you shouldn't kill other people. So why would there have to be a law for that? Unless you were of a lower consciousness and you had to actually learn why you shouldn't kill other people. So, like I said, there are certain things that are unnatural to the universal laws, to the ways of life, to the ways of the universe. And they will never become natural. They will always be opposed to that. So the side of the Father realized it. And that's why they have their own commandments. Or this is why they keep the commandments of the Most High. And have the testimony of Jesus Christ, which Jesus Christ literally spoke plainly and spoke the truth. He literally, anything that he said could only be misinterpreted or misunderstood by people of a lower consciousness. But if you have a higher consciousness, you see it plainly for what it is, because it's so common sense. That's why he spoke in parables, because even the parables themselves were common sense. But if you were of a lower consciousness, you didn't understand the parable. And it wasn't meant for you to understand. So, yeah. By the time of Jacob and Esau, the second war had happened. The second great war. The second great war happened. And after the second great war, there was basically... All right, so like I was saying, after the second great war happened, there was, like, all hope was lost, basically. There was no hope of becoming higher in consciousness or higher in spiritual vibration or spiritual frequency. There was no hope of ascending to the higher realms, to the higher dimensions. But there was still a slither of hope. But by this time, after the second great war, you had intermingling between the seed of Satan and the seed of Adam and Eve. So that's why I said there was no hope, because by this time you have all of them living in societies together, and you have them learning from one another, and you have them basically doing their own thing, living their own lives. Most of the side of the father has forgot who they were and where they came from, and they're just learning from the side of the mother or the side of Satan, and they're worshiping idols and they're worshiping other deities and so on and so forth. But there is still that DNA from the side of the father. So that's why I said there's a slither of hope. So what the father decides to do is glean. I'm looking for another word. But glean all of the DNA from Satan out of this chosen people. And to be truth be told, it started with Abraham. And I want to say I saw this in another video where somebody actually went in depth into it on how the Most High talks about the wheats and the tares and the thorn bushes or the vines and stuff, or the weeds that grow up with the good fruit, right? And he was like, well, the Most High said, like, basically, they have to grow up together, because if you kill the weeds too early, or if you try to take the weed away too early or whatever, it's just gonna grow back, and you're not gonna get anything from that. So basically, you have to wait until they grow up together and then kill the weed, or take away the vine, or remove the vine, or remove the bad fruit, etc. So this is what he was doing from Abraham on down. So if you look at it from this perspective, Abraham had both DNA from Satan and from Adam, or the father. And he uses Abraham's descendants to basically purify that lineage all the way up until Jacob and Esau. So when you get to Jacob and Esau, you have another Cain and Abel story. You have Jacob and Esau, which are brothers. Jacob let me start with Esau. Esau inherits all of the DNA of Satan and the mother, and Jacob inherits all the DNA from the father and Adam. So this is where our spiritual growth begins, because once you get to Esau and Jacob, the line has been purified enough to where we can start to raise our consciousness again. And we're getting to that point now, which is why they call it the end times, because we're able to raise our consciousness well above what it was in those days. Back to the consciousness of the higher dimensions. So after the Second Great War, you get to Esau and Jacob. And I already told you the enmity between the two. And what I was looking for was basically how how Jacob was the mirror image of Genesis. Well, yeah, mirror image. I was right. The mirror image of Genesis. And between thy seed and her seed, it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So Jacob and Esau are the mirror image of this. When they are born, Esau comes out first, and you have Jacob grabbing hold of Esau's heel, the heel of his foot. So in Genesis, it says, it shall bruise thy head and thou shalt bruise his heel. So Jacob is the head and Esau is the heel. But they're the mirror image because Esau came out first, making him the head, and Jacob grabs a hold of his heel. So this is what causes the enmity, because Jacob was supposed to be the head. But it reverses itself back to its normal iconography once they become older, because Jacob basically steals Esau's blessing from Isaac. And in doing so, he becomes the head and Esau becomes the heel. Now, when Esau becomes the heel and Jacob becomes the head, Esau bruises Jacob's heel by basically usurping power. It's in another book, I think, but yeah, I can look it up. Yeah, it's in 2nd Ezra, chapter 6, verse 9. For Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. So Esau basically becomes the head again, even after Jacob steals his blessing. Esau becomes the head again, and Esau becomes Edom, and Edom ends up basically ruling the world. Edom is a nation. Edom is a nation, but that nation ends up ruling the world. Now, in 2nd Ezra, chapter 6, verse 9, it says, that Esau is the end of the world. So Edom, that nation that rules the world, will be the end of the world. And Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. So Edom slash Esau's reign will come to an end. And with that comes a new beginning where Jacob is the head again. So it's like a power struggle. It's a back and forth because of that enmity between them. So in this quote unquote end of the world or end of the age, Jacob becomes the head again. And that's paralleled with the scripture in the Bible where they are first born and Esau comes out first, but Jacob grabs his heel. Esau came into the world first. So at Esau's end, which is his heel or his foot, at Esau's end, Jacob is grabbing hold because it's a new beginning for him. He came out second. He came into the world second. So it's going to be the beginning for him, but the end for Esau. And like I was saying, this is how the Most High purifies the line of Adam and Eve. And in doing so, we are able to become more not only more conscious, but spiritually strengthened, basically. Excuse me. So let's get to the end of my dream vision. So at the end of my dream vision, this is technically like the mid end, but basically we evolved to where we are now, right? And we've developed nuclear powers again. So what was seen in my dream vision was there's still an enmity between both sides, but through the ages or through the years, we've become more technologically advanced, right? So the side of Satan used technology to keep us enslaved mentally. So they no longer they still use religion, but they more so used technology. So after the Second Great War, once we started becoming more technologically advanced, they realized that they could use technology instead of religion to keep us mentally enslaved or on a lower vibration, a lower frequency, lower in consciousness. So at the end of my dream vision, I saw that there will be another great war, which would be the Third Great War, which would be World War III. And what they are trying to do is create another nuclear winter. Well, I can't say that they're trying to create another nuclear winter, But I can say that they might intentionally create another nuclear winter. Or they might have realized that they could use nuclear winter. I believe that they have all of the original information. So what they what they plan to do is create another nuclear winter. The thing about it is, though, they don't want to have to create another nuclear winter. They want to just kill us off. So their original plan is to create a race war because there's already an enmity between us anyways. So if they could create a race war, that would give them authority in their mind to kill us off without having to cause nuclear war or nuclear winter. But we've evolved beyond the point of being enticed by racially motivated acts or racially motivated distractions, basically. False flags, whatever. We've evolved beyond that point, and they're starting to realize that. So their last trump card is to cause nuclear winter, which nuclear winter would cause us all to fall back asleep. And in doing so, they could bring about their new world order where we are completely, utterly, and totally subservient to them and mentally enslaved for ever, basically. But in scripture, like it says in scripture, God's word can't be changed. You can't add to it, you can't subtract to it. Even though they try to, the original words of the Most High still reign true. And if you have a certain level of consciousness, you see it for what it is, or a certain level of discernment. That's why in my videos, I always say you have to have discernment. But if you have a certain level of discernment and consciousness, the Most High's words still reign true because they can't completely and totally get rid of the words of the Most High or change the words of the Most High. So in scripture, it tells you that we will be saved from what's to come because we are now on a higher spiritual level and a higher level of consciousness. And this time is called the time of the harvest because this is where in scripture the Lord was talking about the tares growing up with the wheats and the weeds growing up with the grapes and so on and so forth. They had to grow up with us in order to be reaped. And once they get reaped, they go into the fire. They go into the furnace, which only leaves the good fruit. So the good fruit will be saved while all of the bad fruit and the weeds and the tares are thrown into the furnace, thrown into the fire. And that's what we do. Like, that's what farmers do, right? They get rid of the bad. They get rid of the bad fruit. They get rid of the bad eggs. They get rid of the bad whatever, the bad harvest, and they keep the good. So that's what this is. And with that, that is the end of my dream vision. But also, I want to add this in that is also the meek inheriting the earth. That is also the 144,000 being saved out of the time of Jacob's trouble. That is salvation. So there are still things to come. They still have plans, but all of their plans will fall through. None of their plans will work out in their favor, basically. Everything that they plan goes awry because it goes against natural order. It goes against universal law. So their plans could never actually come into fruition. Like there's no need for a law for you to live as a human, right? You're a human. It's common sense. You're a human. You should be able to live as a human. But they don't see it that way. But their way of thinking is unnatural. They think what they're doing is necessary. They think it's a necessary evil. And they think they're doing what is righteous in their eyes. But they'll soon find out that it's unrighteous because it goes against universal law. With that being said, I think I'm going to end the video. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for your continued support. Excuse me. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. I always say if you have any questions to comment, hit me up. And if you have any anything outside of the videos that I make, like any topics that you want me to speak on or make a video about, just let me know because that's what I'm here for. I'm here to teach. That's my purpose. I believe that's my purpose. I believe in the Most High, and I want to do the will of the Most High. But sometimes I'm at a loss at what I should be doing. So with that being said, like I said, thank you guys for watching. Tune in next time for the next video. This is your brother, the prodigal son 901, Abir Yisrael. Thank you guys for watching. Until next time.